need those important crops like cotton and tobacco.
And corn. Hello, good evening.
Again. No,
Hope you're all enjoying the weather that feels like July in May. Ooh, that's right. Okay, so welcome to the Budget Committee meeting this evening. We're going to start out tonight with public testimony, public comment on the City Manager's proposed FY15 budget. So I'm going to go ahead. I've not yet received the comments or the cards. Do we have those? Sign-in sheets?
Larry, do you have some sheets for us? Here they come.
Great, thank you.
Please. Thank you, Senator.
So while he's bringing those up, just so that everyone knows, anyone who's going to comment, please make your way to the table in the front. I'll read the name of the person who's going to speak, followed by the next person who will come up. That way, if you're the second person, please just get ready and know that you'll be next. Come on up. You'll sit at this table, and you'll have 3 minutes to make your comments. You can see the clock, I hope, from where you're sitting there. And when it gets to yellow, that means you only have a few more seconds, and it's time to conclude your remarks. And then when you get to red, then your time is up, and we'll go to the next person. Finally, I'm just going to remind and ask everyone in the audience to please refrain from clapping or anything like that. We want to make sure everyone feels comfortable with their comments and has a chance to be heard. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We're going to start with Susan Tavakolian, followed by Cindy Clark.
Good evening. I'm Susan Tavakolian, President of the League of Women Voters of Lane County. The League has followed the City of Eugene Budget Committee's deliberations about the fiscal year 2015 budget since last fall. The committee's comprehensive process has allowed a thoughtful investigation and discussion of options to address the projected FY15 revenue shortfall in the general fund. The process has also provided opportunities for citizen input, which has impacted the alternatives that have moved forward into the City Manager's proposed budget. In general, the League believes that budget reductions should be determined by prioritizing services rather than by using across-the-board decreases. The League supports several decisions that have been incorporated into the budget proposal before you. Specifically, we are pleased that the Human Services Commission discretionary funding will not be reduced, and that funding for the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency and for membership dues for the Lane Council of Governments has been included. We also support the use of one-time sources to continue the operation of the Sheldon and Bethel branch libraries for one more year while stable funding is sought. We believe that voters should be given the opportunity to approve a local option levy that would restore funding for the downtown library and branches to a more adequate level. We appreciate the time and effort expended by the Budget Committee to craft a well-considered plan for fiscal year 2015. Thank you for the opportunity to present the League's comments to the Budget Committee.
Thank you. All right, Cindy Clark, followed by Linda.
Hello, my name is Cindy Clark. I reside in Councillor Clark's ward, and I'm also a City of Eugene employee. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of AFSCME Local 1724. I'm the president of that local. We represent approximately 600 city employees, all full-time and part-time. We have a significant portion of part-time employees as well. First, I wanted to say thank you very much for all of your hard work, elected officials, Budget Committee volunteers, and staff, for all the work that you've done in engaging community in this process. I know it took a lot of extra time, a lot of extra energy, and it was appreciated. And it's also, I see that reflected in not just the process, but in this document. I've come before you in the past to talk about management ratios. It's come up in some of our meetings with councilor members on we're a service agency. We don't make widgets, we provide service. And in order to provide service, you need the people to provide those services. And one of the trends that I've pointed out over the years is we seem to have a lot of people who plan the work, analyze the work, and manage the work, while at the same time reducing the number of people who do the work. And it's a trend that I still see continuing. Another trend that I'm seeing in looking at this budget document, and I was looking specifically at the department financials. First, a gold star. to fire and emergency medical services. I don't know if Chief Groves is here. Or...
Yep.
He is here, so yay. Gold star to the fire department for maintaining their staffing levels over from fiscal year 12 through fiscal year 15, maintaining their staffing levels. But you'll also notice when you look at their M&S, they had a significant drop. It was a 16.6% drop in their M&S. Now at the Eugene Public Library, we didn't see that. In looking at fiscal year 12 through fiscal year 15, the FTE, and mind you, at the public library, they don't have a lot of full-time employees, mostly management, other staff are part-time. We saw a reduction of 12.8 FTE, which represents 7% of the full staff, and an increase in their budget, their M&S budget of 7.45%. That's something we see in the police department, something we've seen in central services. I would encourage you to take a look at those trends and just look at them. Perhaps we should consider something like the state did when it comes to looking at management ratios, management to employee ratios. The state was able to do it. Not sure why we couldn't do the same thing. It's just something to consider. And again, I wanted to thank you all for your time and for your energy in this process.
Thank you. Thanks. Linda Ague, followed by Tom Mulhern.
My name is Linda Ague. I live in Ward 4, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the library patrons of Eugene. First, I want to thank you for all the hard work and decision-making that has taken us this far in the process, and urge you to keep the process moving forward by accepting the recommendation to keep the library branches open for a year and to make way for a library levy in the future. Having addressed you multiple times in the past, I know you have heard all the reasons for maintaining library services. As a resident of the city of Eugene, I'm extremely proud of our award-winning downtown library and believe it stands as a powerful symbol of Eugene's commitment to an informed citizenry. As a resident of the Sheldon area, I love my little library as much as I love the big one. But I realize that for many of its users, it is the only library they know. And for whatever reason they have, age, comfortable size, convenience, whatever, for many it is the only one they will ever use. Given the chance, I believe the voters in the Sheldon area will join others in the city to say yes to a levy that allows them to keep their library as well as increasing services to all the city's libraries. I am here to personally volunteer my services in working toward a levy that will restore library services to their full measure. I am also here to speak for the Friends of the Eugene Public Library and to volunteer their services for that same effort. We know you have a long, hard race to reach a successful finish. We're with you. You have the privilege of being the group that can allow the race to begin. We are on our marks. We are set. All we need now is to hear the word go. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Mulhern, followed by Jim Stouffer.
Hi, and thank you for the chance to come again and talk to you. I'm Tom Mulhern from Catholic Community Services, but I'm here to speak on behalf of the Human Services Network in the community. And I sent you all an email earlier in the week. I hope you all got that. The numbers are pretty simple to follow. The Human Services allocation is currently $1,035,000. This budget proposal proposes to cut out $175,000 of that, which was previously labeled one-time funding, and that's a 16.9% reduction from current levels. Then the budget proposes to cut an additional $250,000 out of what's left, which would be a total of a 41% reduction from current, but then reinstate the $250,000 with one-time funding. So basically, it's taking away $175,000, then relabeling $250,000 as one-time funding. Well, I think taking away the $175,000 is a bad idea, but relabeling $250,000 of what's left as one-time funding is an even worse idea, and we hope that you will reconsider that. We think that it's totally unnecessary to do that. $250,000 is 0.2% of the expenditures in the general fund, and we think another way can be found to deal with that rather than labeling it as one-time funding. Because when you do that, you create the environment for cutting it next year or the year after at some point down the line. And that's what we would like to avoid and forestall. That's what happened with $175,000 that's being cut this year. It was not added to the budget in the past as a one-time. It was part of the ongoing funding, and then in exactly the same way, it was cut and then restored at the same time and relabeled as one-time funding. So what troubles us particularly is that this is a shift in policy. the city has a long-standing policy of trying to preserve and even augment support for human services. And this is really a step in the other direction. And, I mean, if that's the way you really want to go, then just, be straightforward about it. But we don't think that's the right way for this to go, and we think a lot of your constituents don't agree that this is the right way to go. So I hope that you'll please reconsider labeling that $250,000 as one-time funding.
Thank you. Jim Stouffer, followed by Merle Botke.
I'm going to pass on my comments for now.
Okay, great. Merle Botke, followed by Jim McCarthy.
Hi, I'm Earl Botke, and a lifetime user of the libraries and a regular volunteer at the present library. And I want to say thank you very much for listening to people and restoring funding to keep the two branches open at least one more year, as well as keep most of the services of the downtown library. I'm disappointed that you're feeling the need to cut the Sunday morning hours. And I also want to say, as a person who worked on the previous local option levies for the library, that I'm looking forward to working on another one so that we can restore the cuts that have been made to library services in the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim McCarthy, followed by Beth Walsh.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jim McCarthy. I live at 468 Delwood Drive. This is my first opportunity to be at a budget meeting, and so new horizons are being opened for me. I read the paper yesterday, and something concerned me about the article about the budget, and that was the shifting of $605,000 from the general fund to the stormwater fund for parks and open space maintenance. I personally have probably put in 700 or 800 hours working on the Rose Garden in the last 20 years, and we're currently in talks with the Rose Garden about doing 4 or 5 more work sessions this summer as part of our service club. So I'm a huge supporter of the parks. I am also an avid library user, so I'm a huge library supporter, and I have no feeling right now one way or another about the budget. But this article in the paper about the $605,000 being transferred just rang a bell with me. And that bell is that last year we went through the shifting of the parks and maintenance to the sewer or stormwater department, so then we could assess everybody $10. That caused kind of a firestorm, and then they decided to go to the voters and ask the voters if they wanted to vote on a fee, and that was turned down. And I want to be corrected if I'm wrong, because tonight when I got here, I read that it says transfer stormwater services to stormwater fund. But what I'd like to know before I leave here this evening, if I can, is this the same thing we tried to do last year by transferring the parks into the stormwater fund so then we can assess the people without a vote? Because I just feel like it shouldn't be done that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth Walsh, followed by Tawasi.
Good evening. I'm here today as a private citizen. I live in Claire Surratt's district, but I'm also in the Bethel School District. I'm a longtime library card holder, and the public libraries have been very important to my family. I'm very much here to support the idea of a levy and would be interested in being supportive of that activity. Thank you very much for what you've done up to this point. But I know that there are others who speak to this with some regularity, but those of us who live up on the north and west ends of Eugene feel that we have some slightly fewer services in certain areas, and access to the Bethel and Sheldon libraries, I think, is a really critical thing when added to the fact that that we also have some shortages to transportation, public transportation. I think it makes it even more critical. So thank you.
Thank you. Tawasi, followed by Sita Collier.
This is my first time speaking to the City Council, so you'll forgive me if I'm a little bit nervous. I really appreciate you all taking the time to be public servants and putting out the effort to do the will of your constituents. I work as a nanny here in Eugene, and so the well-being of the children is of utmost concern to me, so obviously the library is something that's really important to me. I also have a strong interest in the parks and open spaces. I had an opportunity to speak with one of the gentlemen from the Eugene City Parks Division, I believe, and he was talking about potentially cutting, his job potentially being cut as a field worker. He was in the middle of cleaning out the restroom, which I don't know if you've used the restroom in Alton Baker Park, but it's not a glorious job to clean out the restroom. However, it represents his income, and I think it's a valuable asset to our community to have someone taking the poop off of the bathrooms. That being said, I also live in Glenwood. Glenwood is getting a convention center, I believe, and at the public's expense. So while we're cutting our libraries and our field workers, while you are cutting our libraries and our field workers, you're also looking at putting in a convention center. Now, I used to live in Austin, Texas, and we put a very costly convention center in Austin. It cost us a lot of money, and it lost that money for us, continues to lose money. So I don't know, like I said, if I'm not familiar a lot with the city council, I don't know if the budget addresses the convention center, but I think that that would be a poor allocation of public funds. I also want to speak briefly to the issue of public safety, because I spend a fair amount of time here and in downtown, and I noticed that there's no benches like anywhere on Willamette. There's 34 benches like in a 2-block radius in the Park District, but 0 benches anywhere on the entirety of Broadway. And it just, as a human being, like I have a grandmother, some people here might be grandmothers. If you have small children, they need a place to sit down sometimes, and walking down Broadway, they should have an opportunity to sit somewhere that's not on the ground. I just want to speak to the basic humanity of the City Council and ask you to really consider what you're doing with the funds of this town, because I see the tattered remains of our society, the dregs of community that this gentleman here helps in Catholic Community Services. They help me because I can't eat as a nanny. And meanwhile, I watch other people who are the most oppressed in our town get displaced from place to place. They don't even have a place to sleep. 7 guys with tool belts come to oppress them because they sit on the ground on Broadway. So I'm hoping that you, as the City Council that represents us, can address the issue of public safety misallocation.
Thank you. Sita Collier, followed by David Sonicson.
I'm Sita Collier, and I'm here to speak for equity. I want to thank all of you for your hard work, and I know that in this situation there are no good answers. No matter what happens, everyone in the city will be hurt by the cuts that are being proposed. But it seems to me that cutting the Equity and Human Rights Program by 50% is a little extreme. This organization, or this agency within our city, represents a lot of the most vulnerable members of our society. It's a place where people who are treated unfairly can go. They can connect with the city and find some hope of justice. This is people, Muslims, Jews, Sikhs, blacks, white, trans people, queer people, gays and lesbians, disabled. All of these people, this is a major interface for them with our city organization. And it's too much to cut half of that program. $350,000. We could reinstate the meters downtown and cover that. We could spread it out evenly, cut another half day from a library. Somewhere else where we could spread the pain evenly throughout our society would be far more fair. I feel very troubled by what it says about the values of the city of Eugene. We claim that we are a human rights city, but what does it say when we propose to cut the interface between the most vulnerable members of our society and that organization? Thank you.
Thank you. David Sonicson, followed by Bob Cassidy.
Hi, I'm David Sonicson. I live in Councilor Zelenka's ward. I'm the co-chair of the Fairmont Neighbors, and I'm the Fairmont Neighbors rep on the Neighborhood Leaders Council. And I hope you have seen the letter which I'm here to affirm and support from the Neighborhood Leaders Council regarding proposed 30% cut in Neighborhood Association publication budget. For the council members on the Budget Committee, that would mean less of your constituents at Neighborhood Association meetings. For the citizen members of the Budget Committee, probably fewer of your neighbors to interact with. It's a lose-lose proposition to weaken the relationship between city government and neighborhood associations, and at the same time make it more difficult for neighborhood associations to communicate with our residents by cutting back on publications. Today I read about a possible protest by local volunteers at the upcoming Neighborhoods USA conference for May 21st through 23rd here in Eugene. Weakening neighborhood services as the NUSA conference approaches would be a very, very bad and counterproductive decision. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bob Cassidy, followed by Jan Aho.
Bob Cassidy, Ellen Zelenka's ward. I would just like to make some comments about the budget process tonight. As you know, I've attended most of the meetings, nearly all of the meetings, that including the Revenue Committee and the Ad Hoc Committee, FIT Committee, and I want to tell you that I was quite disappointed with the whole process. If you think about it, last year at this time, when the measure went down, everybody wanted to start early and get going on studying this thing all year. Somewhere around August, I think, someone made a decision that there would not be any decisions on revenue. And that wasn't clear to the community, not even when we got to the high school programs. That was a disaster because they thought it had to do something, but not only with cutting, but with raising revenue. It was messy, even up to last February when things were coming together. It wasn't clear just where the cuts were going to be. Now we hear about what cuts are actually going to be in that budget, and it's really too late to make any changes. This public input, I think, is a farce. I think the one thing that you should be looking at right now, the Budget Committee should insist that the City Council start now to set up a revenue committee, active revenue committee for this next year. The year after this, we're done, pretty much done with what's going on now for 15, but for 16, there have been calls from the city councilors about revenue. And I think that's something that should be discussed. Even though there was a revenue committee, they didn't make any decisions, they just told you what they were talking about. That has got to be starting now, not next fall, not next January, but now, to plan this thing for the various things that they were talking about, ideas that could come up, and input from the community about how revenue could be raised. There is no need to cut our standard of living, our quality of life, like we have been doing because of this, just so that we can maintain security and safety in our police department. We've added people to that department. That isn't the only quality of life we're looking for. But you really understood that when people from the library testimonies came. You need to start now, not next fall, to think about future revenue coming in. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan Aho, followed by Mosatz Zimmerman.
Thank you. Jan Aho, Executive Director of Provox Center and a member of the Human Services Providers Network. Thank you for this opportunity to come before you again. I know several of you on the City Council received the letter from Tom Mulhern, and I got his permission to read to you the last 2 to 4 to 5 to 6 sentences because I thought they were very well constructed and represent the voice of the human services providers here in Eugene. Responding to a 2% budget shortfall by reducing ongoing funding for human services by 41% is not belt tightening. It's a significant shift in policy. I have heard no compelling arguments in favor of shifting city funding away from human services. On the contrary, budget testimony has stressed the key role that the City of Eugene funding plays in leveraging support for vital human services. And I would like to underscore that. The dollars that you invest in human services allows us providers to leverage money from foundations and from community supporters when we have your support. Finally, he said, I believe and I would agree that human services should be a priority along with public safety and treated with the same consideration for reductions as has previously been the case for more than 2 decades. And thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. Mosatz Zimmerman.
Thank you, my friends. Hope you're all doing well. And thank you for your dedication and hard work. My name is Moshe Emmerman, means Moses, eternal man. It's obviously like John Smith. It's a minority name. I'm the founder of Citizens for Public Accountability. I'm interested in a positive vision for Eugene, and how do we get there from here? Human rights. There's no more important department in our city than human rights. The well-being of the human spirit, the human heart, lifts up everything else within city personnel and departments and outside. We've been working for decades to build a visionary human rights program, one of the best in the country. Once you start cutting it, it's not going to come back with the press of a button. Neighborhoods, they need resources to communicate their values. We couldn't have stopped 3 of those 4 Hyundai plants without the strong neighborhood groups. We couldn't have kept Eugene out of acid rain without the strong neighborhood groups. Yes, police needs to be strong, but human rights is central. I know someone who was assaulted by 7 men behind the U of O Law School. The head of the SWAT team came for them in 3 minutes, who was fantastic. And he's also the head of professional standards and officer training for EPD. He told the city lead detective to investigate it, and they did not. That person I know very well, his name is Moshe Emmerman. It was me. I fought off 7 men. There has been no city or university investigation. The head of the SWAT team has been ignored. He's never heard of any investigation he's asked for being ignored. If you go to the Human Rights Commission, they can say, what's happening? John, I've talked to you about this and other things. With all due respect, do you want to still be the city manager? Do you really? This is not the Army. We have a different vision, my friend. What we need is to lift each other up and protect each other. There's massive inflow of people to Eugene and the university, and I'll tell you something else. One of the reasons why forces within the city want to reduce human rights in particular is because it's a parallel oversight and authority structure that ensures transparency. Whether or not the city manager wants it, whoever it is, whether or not the command staff of the police department want it. We need human rights to strengthen accountability. Michael Kinnison is fantastic, competent, and loving. Parks, When there's mental health problems, as the pressures of society increase, we need parks to be better than ever, not worse. If you cut maintenance and maintenance staff in the parks, you know what happens? More herbicides. Do you want more children to develop cancer as they go barefoot? We don't need these directions. Solution. 1% of America now has 47% of the wealth, and it's increasing. Mechanism. Revenue picture. Let's get there. Do you know there's 10 retired folks, all nice people, most of them are my friends at the U of O, who get $250,000 a year under PERS? What if we say 15% of that comes to the city? $250,000 a year. There's a solution. We don't need to reduce anything. Thank you, friends.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the members of the public who came to share their thoughts with us tonight. We appreciate that. So as we move into deliberation, I just want to make sure that everyone on the Budget Committee is clear about what our next steps are. So tonight, our job is to make a recommendation to the council, and then the City Council will hold a public hearing and adopt the budget on May 27th. If the Budget Committee includes in our recommendation that council consider a levy for library operations, then council will take up that recommendation, however it's described in the motion if we pass a motion this evening. And then it will be City Council's prerogative to decide how to move forward on that levy. So just want to make sure everyone understands what that looks like. Also, before we head into deliberations and starting with any motions, I just wanted to share a little bit. There were a couple questions last time we met about the revenue team's work, and it made me realize that perhaps we shared some of the progress of that team with the Revenue Committee members, but perhaps not as widely with the Budget Committee as would have been valuable. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear on that team's work. So in March, after we made some recommendations for addressing the general fund gap, the planning team, which was the mayor and Councilor Pryor, myself, and the city manager, so we discussed the next steps for the revenue team and gave them direction to complete their work of evaluating new revenue ideas, but not to narrow the review to recommendations at this time. And the report, I think, has been sent to all of you and has information about a lot of potential revenue approaches, and hopefully will provide an excellent toolbox for when the Budget Committee and the city are ready to tackle additional conversations about achieving a sustainable budget. So when we begin to address the sustainable budget in this longer term way, we envision calling the revenue team back together to have more specific conversations about matching potential revenue streams with potential costs and needs, so that they are kind of matched up, right? What some revenue potential option that would be recommended, what would that fund? And so the process team felt that the initial review by the revenue team was the first step down this path. So when I don't know when those conversations will come back, but I anticipate it's after the council makes a decision about the library levy. So I just wanted to make sure that you had a little bit more context about the revenue team. Hope you've all also had a chance to read that report. The team did do a really good job of evaluating some options, and I think the next step will be to return to those evaluations after there's a decision made about the library levy and determine which ones require further study to be matched up with potential costs and programs. Okay, so at this point, we'll go. Did you have a question?
I was going to ask if we can ask some questions about public testimony.
Oh, okay. You want to ask a couple questions before we get started? Okay. So Mark would like to ask a few questions. Well, if there's anybody else who'd like to ask some questions, we'll do questions for a few minutes. Okay, go ahead.
So somebody asked a question about the convention center. It's in Glenwood, and Glenwood's in Springfield's jurisdiction, but has there been any discussion by the city of Eugene in terms of contributing towards that?
No, it is in the city of Springfield. The city of Eugene has no financial commitment obligation, nor have we been in any conversations with anybody about that.
Great, thanks. And so another question, somebody discussed the idea or the issue of the stormwater fund. Can you discuss that just briefly a little bit more?
It is different than last year. This is last year what the proposal was is to actually shift parks maintenance services over to stormwater. This is actually stormwater services to stormwater. So these are services that have a clear nexus with the stormwater fund. They happen to be currently sitting in the general fund, and it's very appropriate for them to be over in the stormwater fund, and that's what this is. So there is a difference from this to last year's.
Thank you. And then lastly, I just wanted to comment on Bob Cassidy had some testimony. I wrote down one thing he said, and that was that the Budget Committee should insist that the City Council do something. And I actually had to do with the revenue side of this equation. And I just want to say, from my perspective as a citizens member, our ability as a Budget Committee to insist the Council do anything is pretty limited, and that they're going to do what they're going to want to do, regardless of what we may recommend. But personally, I'm not comfortable insisting the City Council do anything. And so anyway, I just wanted to make that clear. And I think Laura just highlighted for us the idea of we've been working on the revenue side of the equation for quite some time, and will continue to. So thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. This is more, I do have a question, but this is more of a comment. I want to kind of tag on to what Mr. Mulhern and Ms. Allo said. I believe they're absolutely right. We need to stop looking at our funding for the Human Service Commission as one-time funding. It is, in my opinion, it is on equal level of importance to our community, to the health and well-being of our community, as fire, police, emergency service. It's a three-legged table. We've seen various depictions of the three-legged table in Public Works and the budget and everything. It is truly that third leg, and we weaken that third leg and we cut the funding. The expenses of the other two legs will skyrocket. It will cause social disruptions in the community, and the police will be much more active. We need them. They're essential. It's very well run, actually, department. Their administration runs around, their fee expense runs around 7%. That's outstanding. I mean, there are a lot of businesses that aren't anywhere close to that. And so I think, what I'm just saying is, like, next year when we start talking about the 2016 budget, I really think we all need to go inside and think about how we regard this service. To me, it's absolutely essential for a good town. Thanks. And I do have kind of a question, because regarding the cuts to neighborhood services, and what is the total amount of the cuts to that? This is more for people watching, so that they can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about here.
I believe it's $350,000 is for those three programs that we have kind of bundled together, and that represents 3 FTE essentially. And remember, they've been vacant for, with the exception of one, which has been in the city manager's office. The 2 vacancies have been vacant for probably close to a year now, is my guess, and we can find out for sure.
I think one has been vacant longer than that.
Could be.
So I just kind of wanted to have this public short discussion here, because I know a lot of neighborhood people are worried that it's going to be a tremendous cut in the, like their newsletters and all this stuff. It's actually vacant positions, basically, that are being cut.
There will be some change.
There will be a little bit, but it's not.
Most of it is in vacant positions.
From my view, it wasn't
some
drastic in material.
There'll be some changes in that, but we also want to continue to work on how to use more technology, social media also, to enhance some of that outreach, knowing that doesn't fully make up for the difference. But I do think there are some opportunities that this will allow us to take advantage of.
Yeah, I hope so. It would just be ironic, we're hosting the National Neighborhood Organization, Neighborhoods USA, and they're all going to come in town in a couple of weeks and go, oh my God, they're cutting all the neighborhood services. Bad PR. But it's not as bad as I think. It's not perfect, but it's not as bad as a lot of people think it is. Thank you.
Positions in neighborhood services.
Thank you. Councilor Surratt.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank everyone who came down to testify, and also folks who contacted us via email. And also very much, I was going to ask about the Stormwater Fund and point out that we're not part of Glenwood. And I appreciate that what Councilor Brown had to say around the human services funding. As you all know, I've been a long advocate for maintaining the funding as robustly as possible for our human services. And I do agree that this is seems to be a policy shift and a policy question. So it's my intention actually to bring this up at City Council about relabeling that money as ongoing when the budget comes to the City Council for final approval. And I did want to point out, last year or in prior budget committee meetings, we've had dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people coming to testify over concern around the budget. And I think the smaller amount of testimony and the very thoughtful and important testimony, but is evidence of the due diligence that we've done in terms of working on this on the front end and really vetting a lot of the concerns ahead of time. So it's not perfect. There are still challenges, but I just wanted to give us all a collective pat on the back for the hard work that we've put in to bring us to this point tonight.
Thank you. Councilor Taylor.
Thank you, and thanks to the people who've already clarified that we're not involved in the convention center. That was one thing I wanted to say. When we talk about human rights, though, human services, human rights, I think a place to sit is a human right. And I agree with the person who said we need benches downtown. Instead, we keep going the opposite direction, removing any place to sit. And I think that's just a humane thing to do to make people feel friendly. Revenue, I hope we'll do more than talk about it. We talked about it for ages, but that doesn't get us anywhere. And as for the library, I think it's really bad that this library will be closed half a day. But I would like to point out that South Eugene does not have a branch library, hasn't had one. And the people out there need it just as much as the people in the Sheldon area, for example. Actually, we have worse bus service in South Eugene. If you live way south, there's almost no bus service. So it's really hard to get down to the public library. And I hope if we do have a levy, it will include something for a branch in South Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you. Marty.
I was just pulling up the budget, the resolution placing the last library levy on the budget and comparing some numbers. The library budget at the time was about $10 million. The levy covered just over half of that. And so the cuts we're talking about here to recover some money for other projects are, a power of 10 less. So if we really are going to go back to a levy that covers that much of the budget, there would be the ability to use the balancing, the funds that we're no longer taking from the general fund to replace some of these things in whatever manner the council sees fit at that time. Now, of course, you may choose not to go forward with that and only ask for the base amount. But if you're going to go out for a levy, I think that certainly should. And I would ask that you consider, if there is a referral for a levy, that it include all of library, cultural, and recreational services, because frankly, there are constituencies in there that would be interested in participating in promoting such a levy, including the swimmers and all those who have suffered more minor cuts but would like to see services restored. And I think it was Echo Hollow Pool or Emerald. Anyway, one of the swim groups was talking about the increases that we've basically imposed on them by increasing user fees. And if we were able to replace some of that funding with a levy, I'm sure they would want to participate in promoting the levy as well. Thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you very much. I want to congratulate everybody on a lot of meetings and a lot of hard work to get to this place where the manager's proposed budget meets with very little resistance or very little public outcry, and by and large, large community support, and we get through it quickly. I wanted to, I suppose, congratulate the manager, but ask that we consider an idea, and also give our friends in the Human Services Commission and the Human Services Industries some bit of comfort. Say this: as one of the first things you learn on council is that the acting or this current or the sitting city council has absolutely no authority to bind the hands of some future council. This council today can, even though frankly with 4 people running and no opponents, it'll likely be the same council. This year's council has absolutely no legal authority to bind next year's council about what they spend in the budget. The reason I bring this up is every time we approve an annual budget, it's all one-time money. This is the only time we have the opportunity to make this authorization for the manager. Next year will also be a one-time opportunity. I suggest we consider a change in the language because it's confusing to a lot of people. We don't have a sustainable match of the amount of money we have spent to the amount of money we would like to spend, or that we have in service levels that have been typically the pattern. There's all kinds of ways we could discuss this. But to label things one time as opposed to ongoing presupposes what the council will decide next year. And I think we should be careful of that. So.
Thank you. Ken?
I guess I'd just like to make a comment. I'm in support of the recommendation that staff has brought forward for the budget, and we'll support that tonight. And I also appreciate very much the testimony that we heard. As several have said, as I have reflected on this, I think that we did good work over the last year or so. I think we basically did what we said we would do. We stopped last spring and said, let's take a look at this and let's involve the community in some discussion and go through it pretty intentionally. And I think that I participated in a lot of that, and I think that we tried to do that. And I think we were generally successful. None of us, speaking for myself, I can say we making reductions to these programs is not anything anybody wants to do. The fact remains that barring one-time funds, barring new sources of revenue, we do not have the revenue to cover the cost of the programs, and we need to make some reductions. So that's really what's happened here. There was some talk Tuesday night about a couple of the graphs we were looking at, and I think it bears repeating. When we look at it going forward, we really don't quite yet have a stable budget. Now, there's a couple of ways to get there. We can do some more program cuts, or we can come up with some additional revenues, and I think we're going to really be looking at that. But I think the fact is we've closed the gap, so to speak, but we're also forecasting that our reserve for revenue shortfall fund will be going to zero over the next few years, barring any one-time funds. So I think it's safe to say, barring any of that, we're likely to be sitting here a year or so from now looking at some additional program reductions. So I think making every effort to kind of avoid that. I agree we should be looking at some additional revenue sources. Definitely appreciate the comments. I think the only other thing I would say, I think we might want to consider, as we go forward the next year, doing some variation maybe, but looking at some kind of process like we did in the last year to maybe more than in the past try to involve the community in discussion about these, particularly if we're looking at having some potential program reductions in front of us. So, thanks.
Thank you. Bob?
I want to thank everyone for a lot of hard work this year. Suffice to say, we had a lot of meetings. We tried to do a lot of things. I don't know if they were always successful. In regards to the budget that we have in front of us, do I like it? No. Do I hate it? No. I wish that we had maybe flipped some of the things we did this year. I wish we had started off our season of meetings this year worrying about revenue and working forward instead of having it be at the end of the cycle. Maybe if the revenue team had been able to start earlier and come forth with recommendations, which we were not able to do when it was pushed back so late in this cycle, we might have been able to help ease the budget, not only for this year but for next year. I wish that we didn't have to make any cuts. I wish that all our programs were funded. I wish that all of our staff was employed. I wish that there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We don't always get what we wish for. We don't always get what we want. We have to work through and make our cuts and our recommendations. And I think with what we've been given so far this year, we're making some pretty good recommendations. It could be better. It could be far worse. I much prefer dealing with a $2.5 million shortfall than a 5.3. Hopefully next year when we're meeting, we have money in the bank and we're working towards that 8% in the reserve revenue shortfall fund. That's what I wish for, and I'm really looking forward to completing this year's task and getting to work on next year's. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Pryor.
This is the Mick Jagger.
Thank you. I'm very appreciative of the conversation going on right now. As we're getting to the end of this process for this year, it's the appropriate time to start expressing some hopes and regrets for what happened. And I would agree with Bob. This is not the budget that we would have liked to have passed, but it's the budget that within this year we feel we have to pass. And the fact that we're nibbling around the edges of a revenue conversation, I think, is an expression of that regret, what I wish we could have done. But in some ways, a conversation about revenue is a lot more difficult than a conversation about cutting, because when you talk revenue, you are getting into a whole series of, I've mentioned this before, values and values for what and what it's going to be. And so it's a more comprehensive conversation. So I think it is actually a conversation that spans larger than any one budget conversation. But what we have to commit to do is to not say, oh, well, now that we vote tonight, we can stop talking for some period of time and then pick it back up again later. It does have to be an ongoing conversation. And the notion that the Revenue Committee will continue to do its work and try to identify a specific use for a specific revenue, I think is how that conversation needs to be framed, because you don't just say, we want more money and we're going to do it this way. It always has to be in a context. I know that, for example, Steve Manella and I worked for 3 or 4 years on a human service funding concept. Had a committee. I think I'm the only one left that was on that committee. And prepared a report that we gave to council. And immediately that report, almost as soon as we presented it, had problems because it came into conflict with other things that suddenly occurred within the budget that were a challenge. But that doesn't mean we stopped that conversation. I agree completely. We've got to stabilize human service funding, but I can't do it in one meeting or 1 month. And we'll figure out a way to stabilize that funding, but we'll also have to figure out a way to come up with a revenue source to do that, or figure out what we're going to cut to trade for it. But I'm ready to have that conversation. I'm ready to go into it, but it's going to be a longer conversation. So we can do our work tonight, frustrated with what we wish we could have done, but we can also walk out here going, we are recommitted to not stopping the conversation about getting beyond just this survival mode that we're in, and getting into something where we're actually functioning at an effective level. And that does have to require a revenue conversation, but I want to take the time continuing on to do it effectively, properly, where the community can say, I understand what it is you need that money for, and I understand what you're asking that source to be, and I can put that 2 and 2 together. And I think that'll be a very productive exercise for us.
Thank you. So if there are no other comments right now, I'm actually going to go ahead and, before we go into motions related to the city manager's adopted budget, take up Councilor Polling's motion that he had sent out to all of us, or that I think city staff sent out on his behalf earlier today, regarding the library levy. And so, Councilor Polling, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you. Just a real quick little thing, a bit of history. Several years ago, a number of years ago, the voters of the city of Eugene passed a measure for library services that included 2 branch libraries, one in the Sheldon area, one in the Bethel area. That was passed by a large majority of all the city voters. Because of the budget problems, we've had to reduce the hours in both of those branch libraries. I won't go try to list all the attributes that you can name for having branch libraries, especially in the Bethel area. But I will say that the last 2 years, this fiscal go-around and last year, we heard from, and I've lost count how many people that have stepped up and said they were willing to work with the city to get some sort of a operating levy passed for the branch libraries over and over and over again. And it's not just from library users. It was from the swim team people. It was from all over the city, not just the north end of the city, but all the wards. What I'm proposing is that we form an ad hoc committee to discuss all the different options of possible serial levy for the operating levy for the library. And do we want to include all of the work that the library services do, or do we want to just maintain it at the current level? Or do we want to just restore it back to the branch libraries and the main library back to their normal hours? That's the discussion that this subcommittee or this ad hoc committee needs to do. They need to come up with how much and how many years and how, what it's going to cost us. My desire, I would like to see us fold all of the library services back into an operating levy like we used to before we took it out and put it back in the general fund. But I don't think that's a feasible and a workable idea at this point in our economy. So perhaps maybe the best way is take a smaller bite of the apple. And again, this is what the ad hoc committee is going, if we form it, is what it's going to be it's charged to do. I received an email the other day from a friend of mine that I consider him a friend of mine that continually sends me emails. And he asked me, he says, why do you think you're going to be able to pass this levy? We're not going to vote for it. Well, I don't know if it's going to pass or not. What I want to do is I want to put something together that's workable for the community and for the libraries and put it out to the voters and let the voters decide. If they say no, then no. Next year I know we're going to lose the Sheldon branch because it's on one-time monies. And I can guarantee you that the Bethel branch will probably be at the top of the pecking order to be scratched off the budget. So what we need to do is get a more stable funding for the operations of those two branch libraries. And I think going out for a reasonable levy and let the voters decide is the best way to do it. Having said that, if I can indulge and just read the motion, I move that the Budget Committee recommend that the council appoint a committee to develop for council consideration one or more options for a 5-year library levy, including an option that would restore the downtown and branch library services that have been cut in recent years. The ad hoc committee should include members of the council, the revenue team, and advocates, and should report back to council in the first part of June.
Second.
Enthusiasm for that.
So it has been moved. Okay, it has been moved and seconded. Are you asking to be first in the queue to speak to the motion?
Seemed like we were going to have one. Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So now we move into discussion. Councilor Clark.
Why, thank you. I'm going to vote against the motion. I support the idea of looking at other ways we might stabilize some funding for some programs in the city. I think to do this in the absence or without having had a more thorough conversation that we've talked about having for a while of parks maintenance and parks funding stabilization, and to look at it in context with park and rec issues that are in need of a discussion, especially as it involves Santa Clara and River Road. I think we need a broader discussion first before we go down this specific road.
Thank you. Will.
I was actually going to say something similar. I liked what Marshall had to say a few minutes ago about, do we want to look at doing a levy for all cultural services or just the library? And I'm concerned that we did, as a subcommittee, there was a lot of work done to look at the options for revenue, and as a budget committee member, I never got a chance to discuss any of those. And when is that, I don't know when that's going to happen, what the schedule is, what the plan is, and I really am concerned that come this time next year, that won't have happened. So if this is the means by which at least some of that discussion occurs, then great. But if this fails and we also don't discuss the other options, I don't know what it means. I don't know what the plan is outside of this motion. What the plan is for discussing, or if there is a plan for discussing the, let's take action on the Revenue Committee suggestions. So if there's no plan, then this is
reasonable plan, but if there is a plan, then I'd love to hear it, so.
Thank you. Councilor Brown.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think I can support this for reasons that I just heard from Councilor Clark and Will Shaver. To just look at this one thing in isolation from all the other revenue-raising ideas that are out there, I don't think is necessarily a very good idea. And I'm a little leery about basically going out to the public with what essentially is another fee or a portion of the fee. The e-web rates have gone up and the wastewater management is going to go up a little bit. It may pass, it may not pass. It has nothing to do with the libraries. I love this building. I'm over here almost every day of the week. And if you have a Eugene library card or a branch library card, you can also check out books at the University of Oregon. It's fabulous. I mean, there's nothing reflecting on the library or how it's run or anything. I'm just kind of leery about. I think we got the summaries of the revenue team's reports, but we never really discussed them in any detail. And I believe this should probably be wrapped into that discussion. Because I think we're probably going to have one. One of the reasons that the shortfall wasn't so bad this year is because we got approximately $500,000 more in property tax receipts than the year before. That will probably happen again next fall. There's construction all over town. Will probably happen again next year. What amounts, I have no idea. And the urban renewal district is set to sunset in a couple of years. So that's going to be about $1 million a year. We're going to see significant income coming in the short term. And so in the short term, I think it's okay to do what we did this year and last year, is draw down some reserves, because we're going to see them grow in relatively quick amount of time. And what usually happens is this December, when we see the supplemental budget, I would be really surprised if I don't see that several $100,000 perhaps are drawn from other funds and put into the City Hall construction fund. Funds, money, that's what happened last December, money that could have been used for services. So that is a council policy decision, but I'm just stating that publicly so that people watching and listening can hear that and understand, because I think a lot of that was left out of the public discussions that we held at the high schools, with the residents. So I don't think I can support this. Thank you.
Thank you. I put myself in the queue next. I will be supporting the motion. I'll be supporting it, first of all, because I think we heard loud and clear from the community that libraries are something they value. I think we specifically have talked about having some money to keep these branch libraries open for the very purpose of hearing from the community with their votes about how much they actually value continuation on an ongoing basis of the branch libraries and funding for this library and potentially more. And so I believe that we heard from the voters they want a chance to weigh in with their votes on this being a priority. So I will be supporting this. I also believe, I appreciate Councilor Polling's decision to say, hey, we would need a subcommittee to vet the scope of this, what this should look like. And we know we've heard even tonight from some library advocates. Clearly their voices are a very important part of the process, as are others, both from the Revenue Committee and from Council, to help us decide what would actually be feasible. What can we actually put forward that has the chance to pass and that would actually allow us to continue to fund these services on a more sustainable basis. And finally, I understand the desire to put this all in a large context around revenue and that kind of thing on a conceptual basis. However, I also believe that time is of the essence on this particular issue. Many of the things, if you had a chance to read the Revenue Committee's report, and they did a lot of good work, many of those options that they explored take multiple years. Some of them require additional council-level policy conversations. It's a big discussion. It's a big discussion that we should have. That's a critical part of how we move forward over the next couple years. But I also believe that right now is the time to at least have a subcommittee explore a library levy at this time. So I will be supporting the motion. Okay, and I have Bob.
I also will be supporting this motion. This was one of the things that the revenue team felt strongly about, that was a potential problem solver that could be enacted upon. What I want to say, and Laura said it very well, I just want to reiterate, this is not a directive. This is information gathering by a committee that will report and make a submission for the council to consider. This committee could very well come back after it's done its work and say, I don't think you're going to be able to do this. Or they might be able to come back and say, you can do it, and you have all of these people who are already standing in line willing to help accomplish it. And we heard from a number of them tonight saying, we're ready to get going on the levy, just tell us when. So I don't see that this does any harm to the community, but it prepares you, our city councilors, with more information so that you can determine whether or not this is a good course of action to pursue. So there's no reason not to do this. It does not stop other revenue consideration from coming in. It does not supplant other things that we might be able to do. If what this is going to do, if a good recommendation can be made, it will move the process along. And the best time to do that is when people are showing the most amount of concern about it. And they have been very concerned this year with the potential closing of a couple branches and reduction of service here at this library. So I'm going to encourage this body to approve this motion so this committee can do some good work so the councilors can make a great decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Sorrell.
Thank you. Yes, I will support the motion since I was one of 3 people to second it.
I thirded it.
And to speak to Will's comments about feeling out of the loop, as a longtime member of the Budget Committee before I became a council member, that's fairly typical. The Budget Committee is asked to look at the budget that's prepared by the city manager and is not tasked with figuring out how we bring new revenue into the community. So you kind of get one half of the job. So this is not an atypical response from a citizen member of the Budget Committee to say, what about the plan for revenue? The Library Foundation did send representatives to the City Council's regular public hearing session asking us explicitly to look into a library levy. So from my, and as others have pointed out, we've heard a lot of folks speaking out saying we would like to see this happen. We think there's support in the community for it. So from my perspective, just as Bob said, this motion is being responsive to that request. It's not deciding now that we're going to have a library levy, but it gives us the opportunity to really jump on to this important work. And as I heard someone else say, time is of the essence, and so getting started sooner rather than later, I think, is much better. And it doesn't preclude other conversations around other potential needs and funding. And from my perspective, and I was thinking about this as we thought about the human services question, if we were successful in putting out a levy, depending on what that was funding, it would relieve the general fund of some of those obligations and therefore free up resources for some of our programs that are suffering now, including human services, including parks. And or this committee might decide that doing libraries, recreation, cultural services in one levy might be the better way to go. So I think it's a smart motion to get us started on this conversation, and it doesn't preclude coming up with a more comprehensive plan or having additional conversations about revenue.
Thank you. Councilor Pryor.
Perhaps this doesn't have to be an either-or conversation. I think that the notion of where do we go from here, which is I think what folks are saying, if I do this tonight, is this somehow going to inhibit or create a challenge for what comes next? Where do we go from here? I'm hearing, this is a small thing, and we maybe need to have a larger, more comprehensive conversation about what does revenue and use and everything else look like. And it reminds me, just this morning I was talking to somebody about creating a large plan to deal comprehensively with an issue, and was reminded that sometimes the larger and more complex the discussion is, the more likely it is to collapse under its own weight. Sometimes we make conversations so big, so complicated, and so comprehensive that they don't really have a chance of being accomplished. When you break something up into a series of smaller chunks, you can still accomplish exactly the same thing, but in a way that's more manageable, more effective, and actually more doable. This may be the first of what actually is the what next steps. And the what next step may be to say, let's look at what we need to deal with human services. Let's look at what we need to deal with the library. Let's look at what we need to, and we'll create a list of what those needs are. And have those conversations as discrete conversations. And I think they're more manageable that way, and they may work better that way. It does take longer, and it does look like it's maybe not as organized, but actually it could be more effective and get more things done. Doesn't mean we stop, and doesn't mean we do it without paying attention to what the other conversations are, but it may actually give us a chance of getting things done. And the reason I will say that is, this is doable. This is a chunk, could actually be done. And the reason why I might support this chunk tonight, as opposed to saying, well, why did you pick this one? Why didn't you pick something else? Is because we have a supportive constituency ready to go. All they're waiting is for us to pull the trigger and give them the tools they need to start. We don't have that with anyone else. We don't have it with pools, and we don't have it with other groups. We will have it, but this group is ready to go. So tonight we get past this to give them the encouragement to keep working, and it does not in any way, shape, or form prevent us from having all the other discussions, comprehensive or otherwise, that we could have. So I don't think this would hurt what we want to do next. It may help guide us with a realistic plan for what we could do next. But I worry that if we try to get too big will actually be our undoing.
Thank you. Councilor Taylor.
Thank you. At this time, I won't support this. The reason we took the library, stopped the library levy, put the library funding into the general fund was because it's an essential service. And it shouldn't have to be something that you wait to see if someone will work for. We considered it as something that's essential and should be part of the general fund. And I think that's where it should be. I think it's just as important as anything else. And I don't see asking people to go out and work so that we could fund the library. I know they would work. I know people before we had this building worked. Some of them were in their feet and some were in their knees, and they worked time after time trying to get money for a library. But I think that it is something that we should say we do fund, and it's at the top, one of the very top things we fund.
Thank you. Councilor Evans.
There's two things in this for me. One, I support Councilor Poland's motion 1,000%. One of the things that we don't look at in this community a lot is the fact that we have shifted to an information technology-based society. And that has caused a schism not only in this community but around the country between those who have and have not. I represent a whole lot of people who have not. And they rely on the Bethel Branch Library for their connection to the world, for their ability to interface. 80% of the jobs today are online. There's some places you can't walk in and get an application. You have to go online. I see the kids from the Bethel School District that go over there to do their homework because they don't have internet access. And the second point that I want to make is this. I don't know about the rest of us, but I read my email at from the last iteration of this budget that we had that had the cuts to the libraries in there. And people from all corners of this city, north, south, west, whatever you have said, we want to support the library. Now, I've been in this town 29 years, and there's very few things that I have seen in Eugene that bring people together. If we want to heal the schisms in our community, this is a golden opportunity for us to do that. And to make a good effort at supporting and putting things together that are going to help close our poverty gap in this community and will not continue to contribute to the poverty gap that we already have. So I think that we need to get our head around, this is not a proposal to go and put something on the ballot. This is a proposal to talk about it. And, you know, for me, I don't want to talk about it. I think we've already heard from our constituencies that this is what they want. And this is doable. This is sellable. It's focused. People know what they're spending their money for. So I think that we need to put our heads together around supporting having this ad hoc committee and continuing with this conversation.
Thank you. So I have Marty in the queue, and then I have Councilor Clark, and I'd like to give Councilor Polling the last word on this before we entertain a motion to call the question and move on this. Marty.
I would just say, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think everybody who's looked at municipal budgeting in Oregon would say you have to find a way to rebalance so it's not all entirely dependent on property tax collections, because there's just some fundamental problems with that. But that's probably a bigger conversation than we can have in the context of the next month. A lot of the revenue, this was one of the suggestions the Revenue Committee forwarded, and before we were asked not to recommend things, it was one of the things we were recommending. There were other things we were recommending too. We had not gone head-to-head with each of them to figure out which was going to be our big winner. I think the revenue team's work should continue and probably be given a longer time frame to continue to analyze those, but I think this does give you an opportunity to move forward. Now, look, once we've done it, we should commit to it if the voters pass it, but if we do choose another course, if we go with, I don't know, restaurant tax or whatever the eventual choice is, you don't have to collect your full rate. That is something the City Council could decide not to do. They could undercollect on the property taxes because they've imposed or decided on a new revenue stream. So I know everybody's deeply skeptical that any political body will ever do that, but it is possible. So you are capped on your general fund mill rate, but you can always undercollect if you choose to replace it with another revenue source that is not property tax dependent. So overall, I support this. I think it's the best idea we're likely to get done in the time available, but I would encourage a longer conversation, as any city in Oregon should be doing, about the sustainability of the budget and the better way to get away from a total dependence on property tax as a revenue source.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you. One of the things I hate about politics is when people get afraid to change their mind when they think better or their first initial thoughts on something. I changed my mind. I think that I'm okay with the idea that we're going to get further information, and we can't have the broader conversation effectively without better information about what a levy would look like. I think we need to have that broader conversation. Excuse me. And I would say that I consider myself to be a fairly large library supporter when it came to the Sheldon branch libraries and the Bethel branch libraries. I was a pretty big advocate there, and I know that back on Saturday the 12th, I was standing in line at the fairgrounds at 4:30 in the morning so I could be one of the first ones in line to give the foundation some of my money. But I think I would caution library supporters that we have some larger context issues to deal with. And while I think this will pass, to say, come back to us and tell us what this looks like and what are some of our options. One of the things I've always advocated is the idea of a quality of life levy that would include more than just library services. It would include issues that deal with parks. I don't think we ought to put highest priority, critical public infrastructure type services out for levies. I think that stuff that we always argue about in here that falls farther down on the priority scale compared to police and fire a lot of the time ought to be the thing we have appropriately a discussion of a levy about. So let's get this information. Let's get information about parks maintenance. Let's get information about cultural services issues too, and let's have a broader conversation.
Thank you. Councilor Polling, would you like to have the final word on that?
Thank you. A lot of what I was going to say was very eloquently stated by other members of the Budget Committee, so I won't repeat that. What I would like to say is that, Tuesday night I did say I know this was getting a little bit ahead of the revenue team, but I think there's 3 good reasons why it's necessary to bring this discussion up at the time, or at this time. One is there's obviously the need to come up with a more stable funding for the branch libraries, because like I said, at the end of this fiscal year 2015, we're going to be losing the Sheldon branch, and chances are the Bethel branch is going to be at the top of the cut list next year. The timing, this is, of all the discussions we had in the revenue team, this is the shortest thing to get started of all the different possible revenue sources we discussed. And third, and most importantly, is we have the energy and the manpower willing to work with us to get to look at the issue of a operating levy. So that's the reason why I'm putting it out.
Thank you. So we have a motion to call the question.
Call the question.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, great. So the question has now been called. The motion is before you. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All those opposed? No? Okay, thank you very much. The motion passes, and this will move forward to we will make this recommendation to the council to appoint this subcommittee. So apparently I was overly optimistic about our agenda this evening, and so I would like us to take a look at where we are. So obviously our main goal here tonight was to respond to the city manager's recommended budget and decide to how we want to proceed there. So given our timing, we have 2 choices. I can entertain a motion to continue and extend this evening's time, or we can look for another meeting. I believe one was possibly looked at for next week. If so.
Move to extend 30 minutes, at most 30 minutes.
Second.
Okay, so great. Sorry, yes.
All those in favor?
Yes, sorry. All those in favor. Okay, thank you. Okay, yes, that passes. However, I would like to make a caveat. Can we please take a 3-minute bio break? 3 minutes, and we will continue. Okay.
We're on the clock.
I'm on the clock. All right, let's do it.
Changed my mind.
Just because we said we could go to 7:30 doesn't mean we
doesn't
have
mean
to.
we have
That's right.
Go real fast now.
That's why I said it the way I did.
I don't think everybody's back yet.
Lightning rounds. Here we
Coming.
go.
Lightning round.
We used to do that, right? 1 minute lightning round. Here you go. Yada da da.
Oh, yeah, go ahead and start reading it.
Yeah, let's
Hey,
go ahead and
Chris.
start reading it. Okay.
Okay.
Chris, I think we're going to call this the Mick Jagger budget. Can't always get what you want.
Can't always get what you want. All right, I'm ready.
Yes, go, okay, so
Get what you need.
we have a motion. Councilor Pryor is going to make a motion.
I move that the Budget Committee recommend to the Eugene City Council the FY15 budget for the City of Eugene that consists of the City Manager's proposed FY15 budget, including the property tax levies and/or rates contained therein, amended to reflect appropriations for prior year encumbrances and prior year capital projects, with the following budget amendments. B, there are no amendments, so that'll be the first motion.
That's correct. So, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
Ooh-ah.
All right, let us take a vote. All those in favor of this motion? Aye.
Where went Councilor?
Okay, all those opposed? Name?
Greg Evans. I was just.
Is Greg there?
Greg is part of the group.
Okay. All right, and so,
Here he comes.
here he comes.
Are you for?
Are you for or against?
Just didn't want to leave him out, man.
Okay, all right. Okay, so,
Party's at Greg's house, he's for it.
all right, so the motion passes. And Councilor Pryor.
I move that the Budget Committee recommend to the Eugene City Council, acting as the Urban Renewal Agency Board of Directors, the fiscal year 15 budget for the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency that consists of the City Manager's FY15 proposed budget, including the property tax levies and/or rates contained therein, amended to reflect appropriations for prior year encumbrances and prior year capital projects.
Second.
All right, has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Okay.
Following your instructions.
All those opposed? Sign? Okay, one. All right, and the motion passes. Thank you. Okay, having done that, thank you very much. I want to share some next steps and a couple business items, and then we will adjourn. So next steps, next on the schedule for the Budget Citizen Committee members will be service profile presentations. So these typically happen in the fall. However, due to this FY15 extended budget process, they were postponed last fall. So the service profile presentations, I'm sorry, I'm confused, are happening when? In the fall. In the fall, okay. The service profile presentations are happening in the fall. Yes. So we're back on cycle this fall. Okay, thank you very much. Great. I also want to recognize we have a couple Budget Committee members whose terms are ending, some of whom are reapplying and some of whom are not. So Chelsea, who's not here this evening, and Ken Beeson have terms ending but have reapplied. And so City Council will interview candidates this month and make their appointments to the Budget Committee by the end of the fiscal year. Ken has also agreed to serve on the Human Services Commission as the Budget Committee rep until the end of his current term and into next year if he is reappointed to the Budget Committee. And finally, Mark Rust has not reapplied, and this is his last meeting on the Budget Committee. And so before we adjourn, I want to make sure to recognize Mark for his service, and so I have a plaque in appreciation of your time and commitment to the Budget Committee, and so I just want to say thank you very much for your service.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you. And then as a final note, I just want to let you all know also that I'm going to be stepping down as Budget Committee Chair at the end of this Budget Committee cycle. And so I want to make sure I will be chairing the first meeting of our next go-round. And at that time, we will go through the process of selecting a new chair. I've heard from a couple people who have expressed some interest, and so if there are any others, I certainly welcome, please let us know that you're interested, and I'm also happy, as I know some other people are who have been chairs, to help talk to you or answer any questions anybody may have. And it has been an absolute pleasure to be your chair for this past year, and I really want to appreciate everyone's extra work, time, commitment, and care that was given this year. This was an extraordinary process, and I think I know that there remain some frustrations and some things we wish we could have done that perhaps we didn't do as much to the extent we would have liked. Nonetheless, I believe that given where we were a year ago, we made great progress, both in terms of our actual goal of filling the budget gap that we had before us, and also in terms of getting the community involved in the process, hearing from them, and hopefully rebuilding some public trust. And that will be extremely important as we move forward, both with evaluating potential revenue options and as we continue to move towards a sustainable budget for our city. So I want to thank you all for your time and commitment.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think the Budget Committee should also give a special recognition to you, who took us through a larger and more challenging budget process than we have had before, and you did it with grace, accuracy, aplomb, and high integrity, and I think you deserve a great deal of recognition.
Thank you very much, and with that, we are adjourned. All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
When I'm done, I'm going to get it.
Awesome.